Oh, you're talking about the presidential candidates? This has to come first. This is one of the most solemn decisions that anyone has to make. And I've told all members of my caucus that scheduling concerns are secondary to doing this the right way.
That was Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying his Democratic colleagues running for president need to prioritize a Senate impeachment trial over time on the campaign trail. With the exit of Kamala Harris, there are now 5 senators still in the 2020 race. Earlier, my colleague Rena Ninan asked New Jersey Senator Cory Booker what he sees as the biggest piece of evidence against President Trump.
Well, his own words. I mean, this is a president that has openly violated what our founders warned us about, which is inviting foreign interference in our own elections. And he has spoken openly about those things. And so, again, I will consider the evidence in regards to impeachment when it's presented before the United States Senate. But clearly, we should all, in a full-throated chorus of conviction, say it is wrong for a president to leverage his position for his own personal gain and to leverage our taxpayer dollars in a way that violates a bipartisan intention of Congress in order to try to stimulate an investigation against his political opponent. This is just wrong. We should be resolute in that. There's no questioning that his behavior was unacceptable. The only question should be, is this an impeachable offense?
Caitlin Huey-Burns and Sean Sullivan join me now. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Sean is a CBSN political contributor and covers national politics for the Washington Post. Welcome to both of you. Sean, last week you reported on the different options Democratic senators are considering to help them campaign while they're stuck in Washington for impeachment. What did you find out?
Well, what I found out was that there are a lot of secondary sort of backup plans being floated that these candidates were not even thinking about several months ago, because January was a time, I think, for a lot of them that they thought, look, I'm going to be camped out in Iowa or New Hampshire or some of the other early states. This is the final stretch run before voting begins, before the caucuses on February 3rd in Iowa. So it's certainly a curveball that I think a lot of people did not see coming. And what I found was you're seeing the campaigns talk and think about surrogates campaigning for them. In the case of Amy Klobuchar, she's thinking about having her husband, her daughter, others out there, including the governor of her home state, campaigning for her in Iowa. You have advisors to Senator Bernie Sanders, hopeful that if he's stuck here in Washington, that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, his highest profile supporter, might be able to stand in for him. And then you're seeing candidates think and talk about teletown halls and other ways to sort of creatively beam into these events, maybe show up by video at house parties. But it is a challenge for them because there's no substitute for being on the ground, talking to voters face to face. And some Democrats I talked to in Iowa believe this could be an advantage for Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden because they don't have to sit through an impeachment trial. So they may have the state of Iowa more to themselves when these candidates are trying to shuttle back and forth. So it really is a big time challenge for these candidates to balance these two things. And the timing couldn't possibly be more difficult for them. Yeah.
So, Caitlin, how much of an advantage would an impeachment trial give to candidates who are not sitting senators?
Well, those who are kind of in the top tier, Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden, stand to benefit from this. As Sean mentioned, they could have Iowa to themselves. They can be out there really gaining support and meeting voters face to face. I think you could also argue, though, on the flip side, it could help to serve candidates like Amy Klobuchar and maybe even a Cory Booker, who serve on the Judiciary Committee, who have been trying to break through. Amy Klobuchar has done a better job of that in a place like Iowa. But because impeachment has really taken over everything, it's really the biggest story on the airwaves, this could give those members of the Judiciary Committee a platform to make some headway as well.
All right. So meantime, Andrew Yang qualified for next week's Democratic debate, Caitlin, after receiving 4% support in a new Quinnipiac national poll. So this means that the debate stage will not have only white candidates, which is something we had talked about possibly happening. So how much of a relief is that, you think, inside the Democratic Party?
Well, I think the DNC is breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief here, just because the headlines themselves would have been kind of negative for the party. And it's something that, being on the campaign trail, these candidates are being asked about. I asked Joe Biden about this last week when I was with him in Iowa, and he seemed to kind of dismiss the debates altogether, saying they're more of lightning rounds. sounds. They don't really produce much, but it would have been something that the party would have to come to terms with. I think it is important, though, however, when you're looking at the polling, Joe Biden is getting the majority support from African-American voters. In that latest Quinnipiac poll that helped Andrew Yang qualify, he got Joe Biden did 51% of black voters. So that just goes, we've been talking about this question of whether voters are looking for representation or whether they're kind of placing this premium on finding a candidate who they believe can beat Donald Trump. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing at play. African-American voters and others are not really pulling their support behind the more diverse candidates.
Right. Yeah, we know that Joe Biden has continued to enjoy that strong support in the African-American community. Well, Sean, that poll and another out today showed 5% support nationally for former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. In an interview with CNN, Bloomberg explained why he thinks only he can beat President Trump. Let's listen to that.
You think right now Trump is winning?
I think Trump is getting stronger, and I think he would just eat alive the candidates because they don't have plans that I think are practical, that can be implemented. They don't have management experience, and the president's job is a management job. 4 million people to manage. And if you don't have a lot of management experience, this is not a job where you take training wheels. This is the future of the world, the free world, maybe the whole world. And you need people with experience.
So, Sean, the Monmouth poll today found Bloomberg's net favorability to be negative 28%. So where does this confidence come from?
Well, as we've seen in these polling numbers, he certainly has his work cut out for him in terms of appealing to Democratic voters. But I think some Democrats look at him as a potentially viable option down the road if the race turns a certain way. If you start to see the more traditional moderate Democrats like Joe Biden start to struggle, I think there's a belief in the party that you might see more donors, more party power brokers, party leaders begin to think or at least consider supporting Mike Bloomberg. We're also seeing him wage a sort of unprecedented campaign in terms of media outreach through television advertising, through online advertising. He's spending millions upon millions of dollars very, very quickly in a lot of these battleground states. Of course, he's not focused on the early states that other candidates are focused on, Iowa, New Hampshire, but he is looking at Super Tuesday and beyond. And so over time, if these ads have the intended effect that he hopes they have, Democrats will be more drawn to him. And I think he also seems to be making, as we heard in that clip there, an electability argument that he's hoping will stand out from the other candidates. Because when you look at this Democratic field and when you go to these campaign events, the number one issue that voters often mention is they want somebody who can beat Trump. And he's trying right now to portray himself as somebody who is uniquely equipped to do that in a way that these other candidates aren't. So that's his argument, but clearly he has a lot of work cut out for him. We'll see if this really, really intense advertising campaign will help him in the polls or if it won't. Because remember, there's another very wealthy candidate in this race, Tom Steyer, who's also poured in a lot of money onto TV ads, hasn't really had a huge effect in helping him break through in the polls in a huge way. So we'll see what happens with Bloomberg.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Sean Sullivan, thank you very much.
Thanks.